Let us delve into the issues of public procurement. As you may know, this is the indicator that is currently in the stages of development. The team is conducting extensive research across the countries in order to be able to identify the methodology and the main issues to be covered. So what I'm going to present is not the final methodology, and this is the preliminary outline of the indicator and what it plans to look at. And so far we don't have information when exactly this indicator will be incorporated into the ranking, but we already are, as I mentioned, conducting extensive research across all the countries in order to get an understanding of procurement system across the world. So on the whole, public procurement is an area of significant importance, and it refers to the purchase of governments and state-owned enterprises of goods and works. It is the pool of opportunities for private sector to participate in the markets, and the indicator will focus on the procurement of works. The importance of the matter of public procurement can be highlighted by the fact that from 10 to 25% of gross domestic product is the amount that public procurement accounts for on average worldwide. In developing countries, the figures may be even higher. And around $9.5 trillion is spent worldwide on public procurement, whereas in EU countries alone, 5 billion euros are lost to corruption in public procurement processes. 20 to 30% of the project cost is lost to corruption in construction processes. And what are the pillars that are planned to be covered within the indicator? This refers to efficiency of the procurement processes, the evaluating whether it is possible to achieve the best value for money and public policy objectives, and subject of competition and transparency, accountability, and equal opportunity. These are all the factors that are associated with having sound and efficient procurement system. So in our methodology, preliminary methodology, we are defining the terms of public procurement in the following way. The procuring entity will be the public body responsible for the purchasing and awarding of contracts for goods, services, and works. And then tendering would be the process by which the government invites private sector to participate in a given project within a finite deadline. Bid would be a response from a contractor to a tendering process, and bidder would be the private company that submits the bid. Bid opening would be the stage when all the bids are received at a designated date and time stipulated in the tendering documents to examine compliance with the submission requirements. And bid evaluation takes place after submission deadline, the process of evaluating bids to determine compliance with the selection and award criteria. And the award itself is the process of choosing the most successful bidder who will win the contract based on the criteria identified in tender documentation. So the indicator follows a comprehensive approach, as it incorporates the pillars of effective public procurement framework, and it also benchmarks all phases of the public procurement life cycle, starting from needs assessment and budgeting, and tendering, bids collection, opening and evaluation of bids, award and signing of the procurement contract, potential renegotiation, and invoicing and payment. While the bidding process has been the traditional focus of international efforts, it also tends to be the most regulated and transparent phase of the procurement process. Sorry. Yeah. And other phases include, and in particular the pre-bidding and post-bidding phases, as well as the exception to competitive procedures, tend to be less subject to transparency requirements and therefore potentially more vulnerable to abuse and corruption. In the next slides, we'll get into the details of each phases covered by the indicator. And let us look at the case study assumptions. So we look at the private company, which is domestic and privately owned limited liability company. It will operate in the main business city and it will win the contract. In terms of the tender itself, it is for resurfacing of 20 kilometers of a two-lane road. It's not a highway, and it connects Baku and another city in Azerbaijan. And the value would be $2.5 million, and no works beyond resurfacing are required by this tender. And the entity that conduct the procurement process would be the authority that owns the majority of comparable roads. So now let us look at the phases of procurement cycle. And the first one is budgeting and needs assessment. And it focuses on how the contract value of new project is determined and how the budget is allocated, whether there is the set budget plan for the project or not, and whether the contract value is determined based on having similar projects in the past or having the unit price terms. Poor planning is one of the main causes of delay and cost overruns that waste public funds in construction. And lack of pre-allocated budget is one of the main causes of delay in payment. The internationally accepted good practice would be when contract value estimates are based on technical studies and previous projects, and when the budget is set for the project before the project starts. And we come to the second phase, which covers the process from advertisement to bid submission. And here it covers the choice of the procurement method, whether it is open tendering or fractioning of contracts, and what would be applied for the purposes of the case study considered by the indicator. And then there is the publication of the tender. It is the advertising and the related documents. And then there would be the last stage of this phase is collection of bids from the private sector. And this will cover such issues as subcontracting and clarification and bid guarantee. The internationally recognized good practices related to this phase involve having the procurement process open to anyone, which will help to maximize market access, and which is especially important for small and medium enterprises. And informal interaction between the bidders and the procuring entity should be limited and very regulated. The tender documents should be free and publicly available, and they should set all the selection and award criteria that are going to be used in the process of evaluation. Clarifications requested by bidders should become available to other bidders, and the bid security should not preclude participation of small companies, and the matter of subcontracting should be regulated as well. And this brings me to the third phase of procurement process, after the bids were opened till the time when the contract is signed. And this phase covers the time and reasons for delay between the bid opening and the beginning of the works, as well as criteria that are used for evaluation and award, and the exclusion of bidders, whether the bidders are provided with the notified about the results or reasons for non-selection. And the good practices would include proceeding to bid opening immediately, right after the deadline for submission, and using a well-defined best value for money criteria for award whenever possible. Another good practice is to provide bidders with a standstill period within which they can file complaints with the procuring entity, and speedy processing of contract formalities at the procurement entity would also benefit the efficiency of the procurement process. Pre-approvals of all the authorizations and various permits required to begin the works is considered a necessary requirement for the practice to be considered as efficient and sound. And limiting informal interaction between bidders and the procuring entity is also crucial, and binding employees of the procuring entity to the code of ethics and code of conduct in order to exclude various possibilities of conflict of interests, and providing excluded bidders with enough and importantly timely information to challenge the decisions. And then after the contract was signed, we come to the stage of contract management, and this section covers such aspects as performance guarantee, the guarantee that the bidder will deliver on the contract, contract renegotiations in case there are some amendments that are required to be introduced into the contract, and termination at will of the procuring entity. According to the current statistics, there are 46% of contracts that had price renegotiation larger than 5%, and 83% of contracts had time renegotiation, which was also larger than 5%. And if you look at the international good practices in this area, they would involve having performance guarantees that do not impose prohibitive costs on businesses and that are returned promptly and in timely manner. Contract renegotiations should be limited to exceptional circumstances and not used to compensate for defective planning or unrealistically low bids. This is also another important area. Emergencies should not be used as excuses for renegotiation, and all the details of renegotiation should be made publicly available. The termination of a contract at a will is limited to preset circumstances and safeguards for the contractor, and these mechanisms should be in place. And the final stage is the payment delays and quality assessment, and it consequently covers the payment process, the required inspection in order to confirm that the agreement is reached between the procuring entity and the bidder. And this section also evaluates the main causes of delays and overruns. And the good practices in this area are identified to be the following. The legal framework should set a time limit for paying the contractors. And payments should be processed within that time limit. And payments should be spread out throughout the life cycle of the contract, which would allow market access to companies that do not have extensive resources and that are constrained. Delayed payment should be addressed with sanctions, and contractors should resort to efficient courts to seek payment instead of bribes. And inspections should be conducted regularly. And last but not least, post-completion guarantee should not be burdensome for the company.